Gradar.
And I welcome you, everybody, to today's webinar on pay transparency. And the big question that we're addressing today is, what does the new EU directive on pay transparency mean for you, your company, your HR department? We will discuss the requirements, we will look at the expectations, and we will hopefully, and I'm very sure that we will present solutions on this entire issue. That's what you guys are here for. I'm delighted to be the host. My name is Cliff Lehnen. I've been a professional HR journalist for the last 10, 11 years. I was the chief editor of Personalwirtschaft. It's a leading German HR magazine for 6 years. And I'm a happy freelancer right now, and I'm happy to host this webinar here. The webinar is brought to you in partnership with Gradar and the Fachhochschule Dortmund, the University of Applied Sciences and Arts, I think, in Dortmund. Well, Klaus is nodding already, and it's great to have everybody here. And I would say let's take a look at the topics that we will address here today. This is, I think, Klaus's presentation. Yep. Yeah, exactly. That's the topic. That's what I said before. And let's look into the topics that we are addressing here. What can you expect? Basically, three topical points here. Firstly, what is the directive on pay transparency? What requirements do you guys need as HR professionals in your respective companies? Secondly, what is the view among HR professionals regarding the implementation of this directive? And we have some data already for you, and we will collect more data throughout the year. This is what I can say already. And thirdly, what solutions are there already, and what are the options that you guys as HR professionals have to really put this into practice? And I really want to underline, you have three absolute experts. I will introduce them right away, but please address your questions. Philip already pointed it out here in the chat function. Do use the chat or do use the Q&A function to address your questions, to get your points across, because these guys you have here, they're the right people to answer these questions. And everything that can't be answered right here, right now, we will take with us and give you an answer afterwards. My name is Cliff. I said that before. But let's look into the experts we have here for the next 1.5 hours. Firstly, I'm very happy to welcome Professor Klaus Vormann. He's a professor of business administration, but he focuses especially on HR management at the Dortmund University of Applied Sciences and Arts. In Germany, we have the complicated term for this, Fachhochschule. Klaus, welcome. Great to have you here.
Happy to be here with you.
Always a pleasure to have sessions with you, Klaus. Secondly, we have Sophie Janke. Sophie is a business psychologist, and she's an implementation consultant with Gradar, and she is the one who already did some first exploratory research on the topic we're discussing here. Welcome, Sophie.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Great to have you here, Sophie. Thank you. And thirdly, but certainly not lastly, it's Philipp Schuch. He's the founder and he's the CEO of Gradar, and he sponsors the research project that I'm always talking of us. I'm just hosting this show here. I'm not doing the research, so I don't want to say that I'm doing the research here. So of the project that is being held. Hi, Philip. Nice to have you.
Hi.
Yeah, exactly. And when I say it's Klaus, it's Sophie, and it's Philip, and you recall the 3 points that I mentioned, then firstly, we're looking into Klaus's part. Then secondly, we're looking into the research Sophie did already. And thirdly, we are looking into Philip's, the translation into practice of all that we discussed up until here. And I would say, Klaus, you brought to us some research perspectives on the issues we are discussing. So I already see your slides here, but firstly, I have to ask Sophie and Philip, because during the last webinar, I might have forgotten some things that could have been important at the beginning. Did I forget something this time, or did I now get my act together here?
I think you introduced us perfectly. I don't think there's anything missing. And if we come up with anything, we'll definitely make sure it's...
No housekeeping matters forgotten this time.
No, it's all tidied up.
Okay, well, even I'm learning. So the floor is ready for you, Klaus, and now it's yours. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Cliff. A warm welcome from my side to everyone joining this webinar. As Cliff has introduced me, I'm Klaus. I'm a professor for human resource management at the Fachhochschule Dortmund, University of Applied Science and Arts. Before I joined the academic world, I have been an HR professional for more than 15 years. And in the last 5 years, in my last role, I was head of Comp and Ben at a German company. So I would say I know what I'm talking about, both from the research and from the practical perspective. Today, I will focus a bit on the research perspective, but also on the legal perspective. So what will we do in the next, say, 15 minutes? Let me check if... Yeah, oh, it works. It's a bit delayed, but it works. I can control the screen. So in the next 15 minutes, we will get to know, you will get to know the pillars of the Pay Transparency Directive. So we will have a look at what's in this new infamous piece of legislation coming from Brussels, and how does it affect us. We will also look at the definition and operationalization of pay transparency. So what is it all about that we are talking about? And to round it up, we will look at some research that has been done in the field of pay transparency to better know how pay transparency impacts you in your companies when it will come alive due to the new legislation. And this shall help you to prepare for this new legislation, which is upcoming. So with many concepts, it's always good to draw the temple of the Pay Transparency Directive. You see the 3 pillars of this house. And as every house, also pay transparency, as in the directive, needs a good foundation. And the foundation that you see right at the basis is the definition of equal work and work of equal value, which is in Article 4 of the directive. So before we can even think about if we have equal pay, we need to define which jobs, which positions do we compare. So this is a very important basis. And I think Philip and Sophie will talk about how you and your companies can get there and define what is equal work or work of equal value. Based on these foundation, you see 3 pillars, and the left column, the left pillar, is the one which is most important, which we will focus on today, because in the left column, you see the so-called transparency instruments. This is the legislation that will be enacted to make transparency happen. And what do we find there? We see that there will be transparency prior to employment. So even before someone becomes an employee of your company, you already have to be transparent about the pay that you intend to offer. This can be in the job posting, or this can be in some communication before the first meeting, before the first job interview. For the existing employees, a right to information about pay, a right to information about the average pay of other employees who do equal work or work of equal value will be enacted. It's Article 7. And you need to be transparent about the ways you determine your pay, transparency of pay setting. And depending on your company size, you have to report on the pay gap that may be there, and you have to do a joint pay assessment with your workforce representatives if the pay gap exceeds a certain level, a certain threshold. So the first 3 bullet points you see apply to every company, regardless of size. The last 2 only apply to larger companies, and we will look at this in one of the upcoming slides when we look at the timetable for the enactment of the directive. So this is the most important point, in my opinion, because this is where you have to act. However, the second pillar is not to be neglected, because the second pillar talks about remedies and enforcement. So there will be penalties if you do not comply with the legislation. The definition of these penalties will be in the discretion of the member states. So there are no details laid out in the directive. Enforcing the employee rights will become much easier under the legislation of the new directive, because the burden of proof shifts from the employee to the employer. So in the future, you have to prove that you do not discriminate, whereas nowadays it's more the employee to prove that he or she is being discriminated. So this is also very important. The second pillar we can more or less neglect for today, because this defines some new institutions that you have to report your data to, and some regulatory bodies that help to enable equality. So now you know the house, the temple of the directive. Let's have a look at what is the timetable. When will the directive become legislation in your particular country? More or less a year ago, a bit longer than a year ago, the directive entered into force. Philip, I think you switched. Yeah, no, it's back again. Entered into force on the 6th of June, 2023. Now, the member states have 3 years' time to put it into national legislation. So by the 7th of June 2026, it has to be implemented in every member state of the European Union. And with this implementation, the pay transparency prior to employment and the right to information about the average pay of co-workers and about the processes will become a legal practice in every member state. The next topics show up later. If you are a company that is larger than, I'm having, yes, I think Philip, you clicked because Sophie, because for me it doesn't work at the moment. I don't know why. But if you're a company that's larger than 150 employees, you have to start reporting on your pay gap as of 2027 for the year of 2026. You have to do it every 3 years. Unless you have more than 250 employees, then you have to report yearly. And if you have between 100 and 149 employees, and maybe you can click again, then you have to report as of 2031. So this is the roadmap. Now you can locate yourself, you can know where you are, and then you will see when the legislation will affect you. Now we need to talk about what is pay transparency at all. So we look at one of the definitions from the scientific literature, and the scientific literature very often speaks about pay information disclosure, which is a more neutral term than pay transparency. And pay information disclosure means the communication of relevant pay information between and among actors. And maybe the native English speakers will say, yeah, between and among, that's clear. For the non-native speakers, let's look at the definition. Between usually is between two parties, among is between multiple parties. So between would be between the employer and the employees. So a vertical communication, and among actors would be amongst various employees or amongst the employee and external people. So the horizontal communication. So both aspects of communication are taken into account. The scientific literature usually defines pay transparency along 3 dimensions, which we see on the next slide. And there is usually the notion of distributive transparency. So that's the question if we know what is the outcome of the compensation process, what's the outcome of the distribution? What does my colleague earn? How my colleague is rewarded, recompensated. We also have procedural. Well, that is a translation error. It should be procedural transparency. There's still the German, or a mixture of German and English in, sorry for that. The procedural transparency. So that's the notion of how remuneration, how compensation is distributed, how the process is organized. And then we have the communicative transparency. The question is, can we communicate freely amongst each other, or are there communication bans regarding the remuneration? On each of these three dimensions, we can have various degrees of pay transparency, which you will see on the next slide. So it goes from either complete secrecy, or at least some people know, the employee, him or herself, always knows how much he or she earns, and the CEO and HR usually also knows, but no one else knows. So that's what we would say complete secrecy, to full transparency. Everyone knows. So when we had full transparency on the distributive dimension, there would be an Excel spreadsheet or something which everyone can look up, and I could see Philip's compensation, I could see Cliff's compensation, I could see whatever co-worker's compensation, fully transparent. And then there are steps in between where the managers get more and more involved, and then the employees get more and more involved. So there's a continuum for all three dimensions. Now we have defined what pay transparency is. We know what the legislation will be. What do we know about the effects of pay transparency? And as I'm a researcher, let's have a look into the scientific literature. I did this for you. I did research on all those studies published. The first study that I found was published in 1967. And then you see there have been some 1 or 2 studies every 2 or 3 years until the 2010 years, when the amount of research suddenly skyrocketed. So some 14, 15 years ago, the topic became more and more interesting. And now we have a large number, or not a large number, we have more studies than we had in the previous decades. The overall amount of studies is 184, which is a small amount of studies compared to other areas of HRM. I don't know the figures, but I would say for personal selection or motivation, you will find thousands of studies. Here we have less than 200 studies. I did this graph at the beginning of this year. That's why the last column for 2024 is still very small. This was done, I think, in January and February, and so I presume it's much bigger by now. So these are the numbers of the articles. What do the articles tell us? Let's look at the next slide. Because the results of research on pay transparency are mixed. We have, on the one hand, positive effects. On the other hand, we have negative effects. And we will bring this together by looking at what determines if the effect is positive or negative. So first positive effect, pay transparency can reduce the gender pay gap. Bennetson et al. Did some research and proved it for several countries, European and non-European countries, that the gender pay gap was reduced after the introduction of pay transparency. And that is what the directive is all about, reducing the pay gap, increasing pay equity. Transparency can increase equality, as Obloch and Sanger found out, and it can reduce the intention to change, to leave your current employer. It can also have a positive influence on motivation, as Cullen and Perez-Truglia found out, and it can have a positive influence on the perceived justice, whether you perceive your employer as fair and just. On the other hand, there are also negative effects. Pay transparency can increase envy when you learn what your co-workers earn, what they get. Now, you may feel that they don't earn what they get, but what they get, you can become envious. It can reduce your willingness to cooperate. One of the studies of Peter Bamberger. It can reduce your own satisfaction. You may be less satisfied. And 2 studies, one by Grasser et al. And one by Simantov, Nachyeli, and Bamberger, found out that the influence on motivation may not be as positive as Cullen and Perez-Truglia found out, but it may be asymmetric. What does it mean, asymmetric? It means that when you feel that pay transparency shows you that you're unfairly compensated, it can have a strong negative impact or effect. Whereas when you feel that you are fairly compensated, there's no positive effect of equal dimensions. So the positive effect is less strong than the negative effect. That's meant by asymmetric influence on motivation and on counterproductive workplace behavior, CWB, the behavior that is bad for your employer. And also the effect on your intention to switch, to change job, to leave your employer can be complex. And what's the thing that determines if the effects are more positive or more negative? It's the question if your compensation system is perceived as being fair or unfair. That is the key point. I sometimes say before you turn the light on in a room and show it around, make sure it's tidied up. And that's what I can only, or not only, but it's the strongest recommendation that I can give you. Clean up, tidy up your compensation systems. Analyze them now to determine whether they are fair or whether you have the risk of potentially unfair systems. And I think we have plenty of time in this webinar to show you some means that you can employ to tidy up your compensation rooms before you turn on the light. So I'm done with my introduction. Thanks for listening to me, and thanks for your attention. You will get, as I've seen the question, you will get the recording and you will get a handout which also contains all the studies that I've quoted for those who want to look deeper into it. But now I hand back to Cliff for the rest of the webinar, and you will, I think, introduce Sophie for our preliminary research we did.
Thank you, Klaus. We won't let you off the hook with this, because we obviously have a few questions here. I noted some here, and I think the audience also addressed some already, which I find very positive, because I want to encourage you once more to do so, to ask your questions either through the Q&A here or through the chat tool. Just to make one thing sure, Klaus, just asking for the negative side of the pro and cons. You said there's an asymmetric influence of motivation, very strongly negative when it comes to you find out that you get less than the others, right? But not as strongly positive, as if I understand you right, if you find out that you're paid very well. That correct?
Yes, exactly. So there is a psychological thing. You know probably that we have many biases in our human behavior, and one bias is the so-called negativity bias, which means that human beings are more strongly affected by negative effects than by positive effects. So I would say we take the positive things for granted. Mm-hmm. Things should work, payment should be fair, and any deviation from the positive has a negative effect on us. So when we find out that payment is not fair, it has a negative effect. Whereas when we find out it's fair, we say, yeah, well, so what? I expected it to be fair. Think about when you last wrote maybe some review on Google or Yelp or Amazon or whatsoever. Most likely you wrote it when you were very unsatisfied by the service of the restaurant. Maybe you wrote it when you were highly satisfied. When it was okay, well, you didn't bother to write a review. So I would say this is a good example on how the negativity bias influences us.
Yeah, I see. But just one thing that came to mind when you have so many, I mean, as many possibly negative effects as there are positive effects, then that might be a good idea to, well, or it might be an idea in companies to circumvent all of this and to say, well, why should I do this anyways when there's so many possibly negative effects there? I mean, I could think that maybe some of our viewers here think so.
Yeah, well, I'd rather say that might be a good motivation to have good and fair processes and salary structures, because employees start talking anyway. We have Glassdoor now in the international market. We have Kununu in the German market. So employees are more freely to talk about their compensation. And any rules that prevent employees, even penalize employees for talking about their compensation, are, at least in Germany, not allowed anymore, and will not be allowed anymore on the European level when the directive came into action. So people are allowed to talk about their compensation. You cannot prevent it, so you cannot prevent transparency. So rather prepare and let transparency be a helper for having good processes and a good salary structure.
Okay, I'm jumping into the questions that our audience here poses, because that's obviously what we are here for, to address your questions out there. We have this number of 250 employees that you mentioned earlier. And the question here is it 250 employees in one country, or can it be accumulative in different countries? 50 in Austria, 20 in Germany, 80 in Portugal, 90 in Spain, and so forth. In which case, here's the question, should it be mandatory to report?
We don't know yet, up to my knowledge. The directive is not very clear on this. I have been in touch with the German ministry being responsible for implementing the directive. I've been on several discussions with the guy who is in charge there, and it is, up to my knowledge, still an open question to legally define it. I mean, you talked about preventing the legislation, and it could apparently be some way to split yourself up into smaller entities. I don't know yet how, at least the German government, will handle this. And unfortunately, I don't have in-depth knowledge for the other 26 member states where they currently are with their implementation process. But
that's I think important to know that every country and every state obviously has their own ways of going about it.
It is. That's the way European legislation works. The directive sets the boundaries, the bandwidth, and then it's up to the member states to put it into legal practice. There is no direct legal effect of the directive.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, we have a second question here by Sunando, and he or she asks, is the number of employees relevant for reporting pay gap for the whole group or for group companies, or that means per legal entity?
I would say it's the same question.
Yeah, pretty much, right?
So I don't know yet. Unfortunately, I'd love to give you more details, but up to my knowledge, I can't.
Okay, I think the next point is more a commentary, and then we have another question. Do employees have enough information about how to compare employees' salaries inside one company, and also to compare different companies between themselves?
Well, I would say, if I understand the question correctly, the directive is first an inner company directive. Yeah, you have to get rid of the gender pay gap within your company. Mm-hmm. So you have to compare employees within your company, which makes it easier. However, as you have to report some data to national statistical institutions, there will be some definitions on the data that you have to report. Apparently, this kind of data can then be used to do some intercompany comparisons. However, we know from comp and ben practice, everyone who ever did a benchmarking knows how difficult it is to compare, say, an HR business partner in company A to an HR business partner in company B. It can be the same title, it can mean completely different things. Again, I would say here enters grading, enters job evaluation to make jobs comparable also across organizations.
Which I think, Philip, is what you guys are doing, without turning this into a commercial here. But I think this is what you are doing. You're looking at many companies and trying to, I'm hitting my own lamps here, trying to get things, in a system, or to make it comparable, I guess, right?
Absolutely, and this is very much in the spirit of the EU directive, because what we do is point factor based job grading. And when we look at case law, when we look at legislation that has been around for a bit longer, the determination of work of equal value is usually only valid when you do it with some kind of point factor-based system. The directive is not very clear on what the requirements are. They mention a couple of factors that can be used. But what we hear from different governments actually is that nobody wants to be the grading police. So there's still going to be room for various systems out there. And there's not going to be one single system defined by one government that may only be applied.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing. Because when we look at what the governments have prepared as examples, they are very much stuck in the 1950s. That's the level of the Geneva Scheme from 1950. And that was once developed by a commission from the ILO, actually in the year 1950. So it's a good thing. We'll have a lot of flexibility when it comes to grading. The only requirement really is the grading factors. They need to be gender neutral. And they should be appropriate for the jobs in your organization.
Klaus, maybe a last question here. We've talked about equality, we've talked about justice, about fairness, quite philosophical concepts, if you will. And then we're talking about day-to-day business reality, which sometimes is a bit harsh and a bit fast-paced, if you know what I mean. So is this something that we can actually achieve in practice? Like when we talk about equality and fair pay and equal pay and transparent pay, is it actually achievable?
Well, I would say fairness is in the eye of the beholder. So it may be sometimes difficult. And as you said, sometimes it's a philosophical question. However, usually in the fairness research also knows two dimensions of fairness or of justice, and that's distributive justice and procedural justice. And now you should remember my slides. Two of these dimensions coincide with the dimensions of pay transparency, and I would say this is this is not by pure chance, because and then the research also shows this, while distributive justice is sometimes difficult to achieve, procedural justice is easier to achieve, being clear with the processes, having transparent processes, letting everyone know how the process works, making the process open to be reversed in case of errors. This all contributes to procedural justice, and procedural justice is, in many studies, has been shown to be a moderator on the perception of pay systems. So if your processes are good, conceived as fair, the chance is good that your employees are rather happy with the outcome, even if the outcome itself may be perceived from the distribution standpoint as not 100% fair, but the fair process is important.
That's the exciting thing about Article 6. So when we talk about the transparency instruments, in Article 6, it's all about transparency of pay setting. So the way we read it means that we, as rewards professionals, will have to do more in terms of processes, in terms of reasoning for certain decisions, and in terms of documentation when the decisions are made, so that we can actually prove or show how we have come to a decision. And that's not only in the directive, but this is also something that we've recently seen in several decisions by courts that actually said, okay, if you can't prove why someone is being paid less than the group of comparable peers, then you have an issue and you might have to, pay back the money that you still owe them or something. So there's going to be a lot of new things on our tables that we haven't really worked on in the past.
I'm just pulling in some questions here from the Q&A because some popped in recently. First point is that if we, for example, compare an HR specialist a salary in Germany and one in Portugal, then our visitor here says, well, we can't really compare it because of differences in local markets, living costs, and that. Even if the job level in the country is the same, the geographic benchmark make it a challenge. So how, when implementing a strategy of geographically based pay, how can we compare the pay gaps then?
So the pay gaps will only be in our country.
In the
We
country.
won't have to do a comparison across countries. It wouldn't make sense. We have different purchasing powers. We have different level of pay. So that doesn't make sense. You might have to report your overall pay gap as part of a CSR standard, but you won't have to compare your Portuguese salaries with the German ones or the French ones or the Italian ones.
Mm-hmm.
And even within a country, there can be differences. I would presume that pay in Paris is higher than in Aix-en-Provence or somewhere else. In Munich, in Germany, we pay higher wages as we have higher cost of living than in Uckermark. This is, in my opinion, a fair reason for different levels of pay. And it's not based on gender, it's based on geography.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this kind of answers an earlier question. So when we explain the reasons for the differences that we have in our organization, the geography definitely is one part of it. So maybe we'll be able to cluster or adjust the gender pay gaps by geography and not so much by legal entity. But we could say, hey, this is for a certain geographic zone in a country, or this is there's the capital premium in Paris and London. London is not part of the EU anymore, but capital premium for Munich, maybe in Bavaria. But we'll definitely have to be able to show these differences based on different variables.
Okay, I'll pull in one last question here, or it's actually a set of questions. Where should we conduct our initial reporting for maximum impact? How detailed should this reporting be? And how comprehensive should our communication with employees be? For instance, should it align with the framework of CSRD reporting, or should it be part of our annual reporting and so forth?
Well, let me step in. I would say, up to my knowledge, if you are obliged to have some annual reporting, it should be part of it. I'm not an accountant in this direction, but I would presume that if you do it with a CSRD reporting and you do it annually and you comply with your regulation, it should also be fine. What you need to report is laid out in the directive. I skipped it for reasons of time and complexity reduction, but the directive mentions seven KPIs, so to say, in Article 9, which is the gender pay gap in complementary or variable components, the median gender pay gap, etc. I won't go into all these details because it'll be too complex, but the directive is pretty clear about what you need to report. What I think is maybe more important is the right to information, where every employee can ask about the comparison between his or her individual salary compared to the average, and the directive doesn't say if it's the median or the mean of the group of employees of equal that does equal work or work of equal value. And I would encourage companies to prepare to be able, depending on the size, to more or less automate this right to information, because you do not want to sit there and calculate it every time manually for every employee asking that question.
No.
Did you want to add to that, Philip?
Well, I mean, I could give you a short screenshot of what some of the reporting KPI could look like.
Please, I think everything that helps.
Okay, so this is a simple dashboard. We'll be looking at mean and median gender pay gaps. The mean is set. So this is something we'll be talking about. Median will probably also be something. And here we're looking at the often at the hourly rates for men and women, male and female job holders. And then a gender pay gap will be calculated. In this case, it's based on annual salary. And then we'll be able to explain why there's a gender pay gap. And then we are talking about some kind of adjusted gender pay gap. So in this case, by default, it was adjusted by grade and job family. So this is a concept, and actually going forward, this is something we would recommend when you have a job architecture. Don't only structure it by department, but maybe also use something like job family so that it is easier to explain why and where there are differences. And this is actually a realistic, not totally unrealistic number. So you might have a huge actual gender pay gap or unadjusted gender pay gap, and the actual gender pay gap that is adjusted through grade and job family goes down maybe to 1/10 of the unadjusted gender pay gap. Then we'll have to look at the bonus pay gap. So where we're looking at variable pay, and this might actually be quite huge. And this then also be based on what the number of male and female job holders actually receiving bonus payments. So this is very similar to what we see as a reporting standard in the UK today. So it's clear where the European Union has the inspiration from. And would also be looking at proportion of males and females by pay quartile. This is something that I always find a bit hard to read, but this will also be a part of the reporting. And then the exciting thing is when we talk about groupings. So this is a heat map that we're looking at here with job families and a gender pay gap per job family, which is kind of a regressed gender pay gap as well. This will also be something that is very relevant for our reporting standards. Mm-hmm. So therefore, our recommendation, not to only to have a point factor based job grading in place, but to also use job families or comparable elements to be able to build the groups of employees and to do the analysis.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for adding to that, Philip. Last question here for this block. Is there a specific framework to classify or align our job levels with the EU Pay Transparency Directive? For example, are there specific levels to classify our support professional managerial roles?
There's not a common job grading system. There's not a common job classification system. What we see today is on a national basis. So, and often when you have to report your pay data to your National Statistics Office, then there are some rules already in place. So maybe this will also be then used in the future for gender pay gap reporting. Mm-hmm. But we don't know yet.
Thanks. So what Klaus said, and I think this is something that we should all keep in mind, and it's something that we learned not only for pay transparency, but also for day-to-day things before the guests come, tidy up, clean up, and make it all nice. And the guests are coming, that's for sure, Klaus, as far as understood.
Absolutely.
Only 2 years or 3 years or a bit longer to go, depending on how big your company is. Okay, Klaus, thanks for this very interesting first block here. We're jumping into the second block, and this is where I want to highlight Sophie and her first explorations here, the exploratory research that you guys did on how HR professionals looking at all this. Sophie, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much. Very much appreciate being allowed to be here and share the results of the survey that we conducted. And thanks all for taking the time to listen and start preparing for the EU directive. Because I can say so much, not all companies do that to this point. But let's talk about how we found out about it. So I'm going to be sharing a first few initial results of the survey we conducted in the next few minutes. And of course, you can ask questions if you have any about those. And I'll also, at the end of my little session, then share an outlook on what's to come. So we'll conduct a further study towards the end of the year. And you can all be excited to take part. Yay! Okay. So the survey we conducted was a short initial survey to assess the relevance of various organization-related criteria for the successful introduction and achievement of pay transparency. The survey was exploratory. It was provided both in German and English, and it was published via a standardized online questionnaire. And over the course of only 2 weeks, we received around 80 valid answers from participants telling us their opinion, their mood picture in regard to the pay transparency. The location of those companies in which the surveyed people work ranged across an international scale. But interestingly, maybe because we're based in Germany as well, around half of the respondents worked in companies based in Germany. Another 8% were based in the UK, and further 22% were based in countries in the rest of Europe, apart from the UK and Germany. And then we've got some more percentages, for example, in Africa, North America, the US. So quite international, quite international in terms of the respondents. Now, let me not bore you with the details around how we conducted the study. Let's talk about the results, because I do think they speak for themselves. As a reminder, we asked the companies about their assessment of those factors considered to be particularly relevant or important for the introduction and achievement of pay transparency. And as clear key factors, so those factors that were considered particularly relevant, emerged variables relating to compensation management. Surprise, surprise. So in explanation, the 3 most mentioned and highly relevant or factors rated as highly relevant were job evaluation, compensation structures like pay bands, for example, and lastly, salary adjustment or salary determination processes. By contrast, and let me show you the next slide, as less relevant were rated those factors relating to company characteristics or company demographics, such as the company size, the age of the company, the degree of digitalization of HR, the industry affiliation. So all in all, these results together reveal a clear tendency for respondents to rate the methods for implementing pay transparency as way more important than company-specific characteristics or features. And that is quite a key finding, because this gives us hope that the key factors for a successful implementation of pay transparency do not lie outside of an organization's control, but rather inside the organization's control. So methods with which they can make the process easier and go more quickly towards introducing fair and transparent pay practices. Right, so that was all around the factors that may help to successfully implement pay transparency. However, even more surprising is the result of answers regarding the job evaluation methods used by companies, in brackets so far. So when asked which job evaluation methodology is used in companies, a full 1/3 of respondents stated that their company does not yet have a job evaluation system in use. And that is very much surprising. So with regard to the EU Directive on Pay Transparency, this result is particularly surprising because of 2 aspects. For one, because job evaluation was in the top 3 of 13 possible aspects in this first survey on the success factors for the implementation of pay transparency, and also because job evaluation is necessary for other aspects, such as the design of clear compensation systems. And secondly, because the EU directive, as we've heard before from Philip and Klaus, clearly recommends the assessment of the equivalence of work. So in other words, analytical job evaluation systems as the basis for introducing pay transparency, but also for being able to analyze gender pay gaps. So the fact that 1/3 of all respondents state that their company does not yet have a job evaluation system in place, therefore suggests that many companies have not even started preparing for pay transparency or transparency in regard to their compensation. And that is a very surprising mood picture that we see there, but it is in line with surveys or more like questions we asked on different fairs that we attended over the past few months, where we also saw in the group of people that listened to different panels, they all said the same. So it was always around 20 or 30% of people mentioning their company does not yet have any job evaluation system in use. So these are very striking results. And although this study was just a first initial study and a mood picture that we asked for, it's an exploratory study, at the same time, these results also raise the question on whether job evaluation systems are, beyond just the assessment of individual respondents, decisive success factors in the introduction of pay transparency. So in other, more easy words, what role do job evaluation systems and compensation structures really play in the successful implementation of pay transparency? And even though experts are often quick to answer this question with or in the affirmative and say, yes, of course they are, it has not ever yet been investigated in an empirical study or in the scientific context. And that may be partly due to the fact that there is still no proper scale or questionnaire that can even be used to measure pay transparency, which is again striking, considering the fact that in 2 years' time, everyone will be talking, and already now will be talking about this topic. So this was our call, and this is what we aim to supplement our first and initial survey that we conducted with a scientifically founded main study. And of course, this is the point where I would kindly ask you for your participation, for your support with this study. So we either ask for your or your organization's assessment of the success factors for implementing pay transparency, so that in the end, at the end of the day, we can best support you with the next steps of the successful implementation, of course. So it's a win-win situation. And I'm also over the moon excited that I will be conducting this main study together with Klaus Foreman, an equally motivated researcher by my side. And yeah, again, we will be conducting the study later this year. We're already in the first preparatory steps. We're on the right path. So keep an eye out on our LinkedIn profiles, on Grada's LinkedIn profile, because we really need your support with this study. What will the study's research topic be? I mentioned it before. So it's a survey of European companies on the success factors for the introduction of pay transparency. And it will be quantitative, empirical. It will be provided in different languages and again be conducted via a standardized online questionnaire. The time frame for the collection, please listen, will start in August and then be probably run to the end of November, so that we can start analyzing data from December of this year and then hopefully publish it in a wide array of different groups, of different interested people groups that may take useful information from this study, from the study results. So we've got a website that you can keep up to date with. I've put the link on the little slide, so you can always gather further information. No, we're not there yet. You can always gather further information on the study, and you can keep up to date with anything that's happening. And now the next slide. To summarize everything, and as my favorite ever English teacher would always say, to put it all in a nutshell, firstly, we have analyzed an exploratory mood picture of success factors for implementing pay transparency. The clear preferences that can be recognized for the relevant aspects of pay transparency are compensation structures, job evaluation, and salary determination processes. And there we see the dimension again that Klaus mentioned earlier. And lastly, of course, we brought some recommendations for the practical realization of pay transparency that can be derived from these first initial results and from what we've seen so far. And I believe that Philipp Schuch, founder of Grada, will be pleased to talk you through these steps, through these realizations, and what we can do in practice in the following. So thank you all for listening. And if you do have any questions, feel free to just put them in the chat.
Yes, we have one question already, but please first let me say that you made it very clear why evidence is important for this. Yeah, you made a first sort of exploratory study, and I'm sure that, and just to make this clear, that everybody on this webinar will also be informed when the real survey is going live.
Absolutely, you will definitely hear of us.
That's I think what's important here. So everybody who is taking part here, I think we're very happy when you also take a part in this survey. It's important for Sophie's and Klaus's research here. And I think Klaus demonstrated it earlier. We're at a point now where research is really, as you say, Klaus, you said what did you say? It skyrocketed. That's the word. Yeah, it skyrocketed in the last year. And I think we can, every one of us can contribute to that. So we want to encourage you to do that. Just one point.
We only want your best, and that's your data. So support your local research. I think more research is needed, especially in the eve of the regulation of the directive being put into action. We need to know more about how it works, and compared to other areas of HRM, it's nothing that we know at this moment.
But Sophie, let me address one question here. When you say that more than a third of organizations are not using job evaluation and not using these things, did you expect that, or was it surprising to you as well?
Okay, I'm gonna go back in time a little bit and share an experience I made at a fair, at an event a couple of years ago with Grada. So we had a very nice booth, and we stood there and then started chatting to people coming to the fair and asked them about whether they know anything on job evaluation. And most people said, no, I've never heard of it. What is job evaluation? A lot of companies contacting us saying we need support with becoming transparent in terms of compensation. When we ask them, do you know how to conduct, or do you know how to do the exercise of job evaluation? Most say, we've never done it before. We've never even heard of it before. Yeah. So while I'm not super surprised about the results, and in regard to missing knowledge in that regard, it's still surprising considering that, and it sounds so long, but think about the past 2 years and how quickly they've passed. Considering that in 2 years' time, every single organization above that threshold will need to start reporting. They haven't started with job evaluation. I asked myself, how do they want to do it? I mean, it may be easier in the smaller company, maybe because you're done quicker. But then really, I think organizations need to start preparing, and the fact that 1/3 haven't even thought about it or started preparing with any kind of structures, job architectures, measuring the equivalence of work. It's striking to me that so many haven't started yet, although they really should. Not trying to put pressure on anyone, but no. I think the earlier you start, the better the outcome will be, and the more you can actually change and do for the better before you, as Klaus said, turn on the lights and make everything.
That's when everybody starts tidying up. Just one follow-up question for the study, or for the exploratory study. Can you match the size of the companies that responded with which job evaluation system they are using or not?
There was, at least from what we can tell, I don't think there is a difference according to my experience. However, in this first initial survey, we haven't asked for the company size. We will, of course, do that in our final survey, and we'll ask the same question again. on what job evaluation methods or job classification methods organizations use currently. So definitely have more information on that, and I'm happy to share the results once we've collected them. But in this first initial survey, this question may have gone too far. We wanted to get as many responses and opinions on this without asking for too much.
Good reason to stay tuned, I guess.
Yes.
There we go.
Good way
Now,
to do it. Long
let's
story short.
move on. Let's move on. Philip is standing at the starting line there. And I think he really has some really useful insights for us when it comes to really putting all of this into practice. Thanks, Sophie, for now. And Philip, the floor is yours, please.
Well, thank you. I mean, maybe I can add something to what we just discussed. From anecdotal evidence, and this comes from all the demos that we do, all the sessions that we have with prospects and clients, we can say that there are still many organizations out there that don't have anything. I mean, those are the ones that come to us. It's not only the ones that make the switch from a legacy system, but often the ones that don't have anything in place. Or they only have something for their top executives. And from the bottom up, it's covered by some kind of labor agreement. But then there's a huge group in between your collective bargaining, your labor agreement, and top executives that is not covered by anything. That's kind of freestyle. And that's large organizations we're talking about. So that's organizations with 20, 30, 40,000 employees that do not have consistent job evaluation across all of their business units or nothing at all. And there was one remark in our Q&A saying that red hot job levels, that's a job matching methodology and not a point factor-based system. And it's true, we see it the same way. It's not considered robust enough to establish equal work in an organization. And that's why we see a clear tendency towards point factor-based job grading again, even though over the past decade or so, we saw something, or maybe 20 years ago, we saw a tendency towards non-analytical systems too. The solutions out there, and this is me talking a bit about the landscape, are quite interesting. There are several solutions that focus on the reporting and on the analysis of gender pay gaps. There we have a couple of European solutions like SizeUp from Sweden, such as Pay Analytics from the far north from Iceland, who were just acquired by BCom from Switzerland. And some smaller solutions like PIHR or more local solutions like GapSquare in the UK. And there's a new player in Germany that is coming out at the moment. It's called Ines Analytics, which is a great software that looks into gender pay gaps, but not only into gender pay gaps, but also into ethnicity-based pay gaps, as well as disability pay gaps. This is not normed yet, so we don't have any kind of legislation that makes us look into these things, but it's something that that is becoming more and more important. And when we look at the Labour government in the UK, they are also looking into ethnicity-based pay gaps as well as disability pay gaps. So Sophie is answering the questions in the chat, pointing towards the websites, especially Ines Analytics. That's quite interesting. Then when we look at the American market, there we have big players like Syndio or like Trusaic, who have been operating on the market for a long time. Interestingly, they are capable of analyzing pay gaps by grade and so on, but they don't have any built-in support for job evaluation, for example. So they would rely on third-party tools to do the job evaluation piece, and then they would be able to import this data from an HRIS to do the analysis. They are great. We've recently talked a lot to Trusaic, and when I look at how well they do the analysis, how experienced they are. This is pretty amazing, actually. I mean, they are partnering these days with Aon Redford to support the rollout of their system in Europe. So there's a lot of change going on in the market at the moment, where large professional services firms partner with software vendors to roll out the software amongst European clients. So when we look at what we do, and here it's me sharing my screen, we do recommend to do systematic job evaluation, because it's not only the basis for the reporting, but it's also the foundation for pay bands, for benchmarking, for career pathing, and for any other elements that you would attach to a job architecture these days. And we would also recommend implementing clear pay structures. The thing about the pay structures is, so in the past, we were happy when an organization had pay grades and associated pay bands and an annual process for salary reviews, and maybe some a set of guidelines and rules for setting pay when you hire someone new. In the future, this is going to become much more complex, as we discussed earlier. We'll have to be able to reason much more why a pay level was set in a certain way. Did we use the geography? Did we use a job family? Did we use maybe performance as a factor to set pay? And this is becoming huge. And we have to mention it again. We'll have to document more, and we have to be more precise and more truthful to our processes in the future. Otherwise, we're opening room for attack, so that someone could question the decisions that the organization made, and that we might have to face remedies down the road. And obviously, training of managers, hiring managers, people managers, the ones that eventually are responsible for setting pay and using their budget, as well as awareness raising, is going to be a huge topic in the future. So job evaluation with Gradar, it's about objective criteria. That's why we talk about point factor-based job evaluation, but this could also be Mercer's IP, this could be Korn Ferry's guide charts, or Watson's global grading system. That's the future. And it's the foundation for everything when we talk about job architecture and compensation. And with us, we would have 4 different career paths, and there are 25 grades and 16 executive levels on top. So this is how we look at job evaluation in Gradar. And when we look at job architecture, we look at the grading structure, we look at job families, we look at career paths these days. And when we take into account the developments in HR systems like SuccessFactors or Workday, we see more and more support for rich job profiles. So in SuccessFactors, it would be the job profile builder that is becoming more popular, and also AI powered these days. We also see a huge tendency towards skill-based management, with tools like CoBrainer and TechWolf that would use these enriched job profiles to map requirements of the jobs in terms of skills, be it soft skills or technical skills, to the reality of employees and the needs of an organization. So job architecture is becoming more and more important when you want to do skill-based management right, when you want to do compensation right, and so on. And if you want to set up your HR system properly, it requires the job architecture to function well. And that's the unfortunate reality when we look at how SuccessFactors was implemented in the past, or how Workday was implemented in the past. Often the housekeeping had not been done, and only partial aspects of a job architecture were uploaded, which means it's now a painful and costly process to add the job architecture at this later stage to the system for it to perform or function perfectly. And this is something that we are doing with a number of organizations today. And it's large organizations. So they're starting with 10,000 employees or so. Well, and then, yeah, pay bands. That's a typical example, a pay band structure that is grade-based. Maybe in the future, we have to be more job family-based too. But that's open for debate. It could help us with setting of pay and differentiating the levels of pay by job family, for example. But this is definitely still a best practice, gold standard to have some kind of pay structure in place to manage pay. Well, and then, yeah, looking at the gender pay gaps, there we are looking at the unadjusted gender pay gap, which is not really a smart KPI, but it's a rough indicator for equal opportunity in an organization or in a society. And then there's the adjusted gender pay gap where, well, based on control variables such as grade and job family, the gender pay gap is then calculated, for example, through a regression analysis, and which is more realistic for an organization. We'll probably have to report something like it in the future too. So yeah, that's the topics that we wanted to talk about. And when we talk about the process, and this is a position everybody from us is in, it's always about data gathering to begin with. And the reality is many organizations don't have all the data they need for reporting purposes at hand. Then it's the job evaluation piece. Here we are also in a position where many organizations don't have it. And the same is true for compensation structures, where the design of a compensation structure takes time and might involve employee representatives as well. So we can only urge organizations that don't have anything in place yet to start as early as possible. Because there's also the danger that no support will be available down the road, as all the experienced consultants will be fully booked. And then organizations might end up with half-cooked solutions of inexperienced consultants or, jack of all trades that do employer branding and a little bit of recruiting. And then now, pay transparency is, of course, then also in their portfolio. Well, and then the exciting piece, the joint pay assessment, or what we here list under further analysis. There's a lot of uncertainty about it. So there's a lot we don't know yet. We have a pretty good idea of where it might go, but it's definitely going to be beyond the common market practice that we have today, because we'll be looking at pay of individuals together with employee representatives by using statistical methods, by using something like regression analysis, and by using references from job evaluation and pay bands and so on to come up with this joint pay assessment to determine actual gender pay gaps and to fix them in this group of different stakeholders. So yeah, and all this paired with change management, it becomes very clear that in less than 2 years, this is a lot we have to tackle. So yeah, our clear finding is, obviously, it's sponsored by Grader. Job evaluation is fundamental. Digitalization helps a lot. And really, it's not rocket science. Not anybody can do it, but as soon as you have the right perspective on things, as soon as an organization is able to differentiate jobs from the people doing the jobs, then they should be able to actually handle job evaluation and pay design, etc. But it takes time, and time is running. That's from me for the moment. Any questions?
Time is running also for our webinar here. Time is flying, I want to say, actually. Thanks for the insights, Philip. And you said we need good data, we need job evaluation and job architecture, we need a compensation structure, and we need further analytics. Now let's talk maybe about we have two companies here, one with 400 employees, one with 4,000 employees. What would you say, how long does this process take roughly? Because you said better start today than tomorrow. Okay, we understood that. But then if we look at the timelines here, how long does it take? And just a personal question, does it take longer in a small company where I have less people to do all this? Or does it take longer in a bigger company where I have more processes and more jobs and more families, more complexity, but more people to take care of it?
So there's one classic rule of thumb. It takes about 25, or you can do about 25 jobs with a point factor based system per day, which means in a 400 organization, you might have 150 different jobs. In total, that would be something then like 5 days. So a week of job evaluation, and you'd have a job architecture in place. So that's quite likely. In a larger organization, this is going to take more time, because then you might have to visit your sites in Madrid or in some other locations to see what's going on there, to find out what is special about them, whether everything's comparable or not.
Yeah.
So that's it takes time. I mean, we've all been through this many times before. We do have some small projects and smaller firms where we only spend a couple of days on site with our users. Often they will do the job evaluation themselves, and we would only do some quality assurance. But it's there's no shortcut.
Yeah.
So you've got to do the job evaluation. You've got to understand the different jobs in an organization before you can do the pay analysis and compensation structuring.
Yeah. There's also no shortcut to this webinar here, but there will be, and we had a few people asking, there will be the presentations you all get, plus you also get a video of this session afterwards, right? To be able to access all of this. But Philip, we are often, when we're talking about HR topics from A to Z, it mostly boils down to, it's a culture topic. Would you also say that this grading thing that we're talking about is beyond the technicalities and the complexities that we're talking about? It boils down to a culture topic. So this is sort of the added value that I get, is that I really have thought about my organization and how levels are, how the whole families are structured, how the organization works. So is this also that we could maybe give away as a pro, that you also make a sort of culture analysis while you do the job family analysis and all this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in an organization that has very strong hierarchical culture that is based on command and control, you will see that reflected in the job grading results, because then only few jobs will be part of the individual contribution career path, and especially only very few jobs will be high ranking in this path, whereas a lot of control and decision making is then part of the people management career path. And the other way around. Yeah. So in a delayered organization, in an agile organization, you will see a lot of competency transfer from people management to subject matter experts. And this can then also be reflected in the grading results, where experts and managers meet on eye level at some point. So that's a super exciting insight that we always have when we are in a project, or when we look at the results in an organization. And there was actually one question that I would like to answer.
Please.
It's touching pay bands again. When I talk about pay bands in the past, I said we were happy when an organization had pay bands per grade. And now it might be prudent to have pay bands per grade and job family, especially if you want to differentiate pay based on tech functions, support functions, sales, and so on. So in the past, sales had pay bands and the rest of the world had pay bands, but maybe we need to differentiate a bit more in the future. This could very well happen, but this also will be a reflection on company culture, because some might say we want to treat everyone the same, just like labor agreements in some countries are great equalizers where everybody is treated the same. So maybe they want to continue that into other groups in the organization, or they want to have more differentiation. But that's an open pay philosophical discussion in an organization.
We also have a comment here from a user who says that EU member countries need to implement the EU directive in local legislation in 2 years. But doesn't that mean that local legislation can have an implementation period as well? So we actually have more than 2 years. I think this doesn't help from tidying up, firstly. Yeah, but then is it true?
I would say it doesn't help. And B, while Philip was talking, I dug out the directive again. And the directive is quite clear from my point of view in Article 34. Member states shall bring into force the laws, regulation, and administrative provision necessary to comply with this directive by June 2026. So as of June 7th, 2026, member states need to comply. And maybe not everyone is aware of, usually a directive has 2 years of transition period to be put into action in member states, because the EU is aware, or was aware at the time they passed the directive, that this is a rather complex thing. They gave the member states 1 more year. So member states have 3 years time. And I would say it's a pity that many organizations, and in Germany, but also in other member states, don't use that time, these extra year they got from the EU Commission, to tidy up. But we've seen this all in 2018 with the GDPR, and I presume that the behavior of organizations will be pretty similar.
Yeah, this is really what one can assume here, definitely. We have one more question, actually the last one at the moment. I think I've seen some of Sweden's draft legislation. Do you know if countries like the Netherlands or Germany have provided any information yet, especially the threshold of workers they are looking to use? I see you not, Philip.
Yeah, so Sweden brought it down to 10 employees, which is in line with what they have today. It doesn't look like the governments, or many governments, will be going below 100 employees. Maybe the only very advanced countries, but I think most will stick to the basic guidelines. And that's 100 employees at a later stage for reporting purposes.
For reporting purposes, but not for the individual right to information. Yeah. And we must be clear, and there are some papers published on this more from the legal point of view. The directive is not very clear when it comes to data protection. The directive simply states it has to be in line with data protection with the GDPR, without making it clear what does it mean. If there are 2 employees doing the same job in a company, and the company, and I am one of those 2, Philip is the other, I asked, what is the average? It's pretty easy to guess Philip's personal compensation, because I know mine, I know the average, so I know more or less what it will be. And the directive doesn't give any threshold saying there need to be at least 5 or at least 7 or whatsoever to have a sufficient amount to anonymize by building averages. And there are the data protection experts and lawyers who already complained about this fact. However, we have to take the directive as it is.
I think we have a question here. And when do we expect to see German guidelines? I guess this means German. I thought it was rumored to be soon after the EU elections, but I haven't seen anything since.
Well, I've been on a panel on, what was it, May the 21st, I think, in Berlin, with Lisa Paus, the German Minister for, I don't know the English title, let's say Family Affairs, Family and Women and Equality. The English title of the ministry may be a bit different. And I think, I personally, as being a panelist, but I think also the majority of the audience, and Philip was also there, expected that we would see a draft of the new German law on that date. And it has been, well, not officially announced, but rumors were spreading that we would have seen the draft for that date, but we didn't. And the responsible person from the ministry just said by the end of this year. Well, although I'm a state employee, I'm not a member of the ministry, so unfortunately I cannot say anything more. I can just say everyone in the community is waiting for the draft, because it will shed some light on some of the important detailed questions we are all asking ourselves.
Another question coming in. Any idea how companies will be treated where employees in small numbers, 1, 4 to 5, less than 10, from many EU countries in different job families and job grades in every country, but more than 150 employees globally? I didn't read that first, but I think maybe you know what's meant.
Yeah, I would guess what Maria is heading for. I would say a company having 10 employees in every member state, which would make 270 altogether. So way beyond the threshold, but way below the threshold per country.
Yeah.
Sorry, no clue how this will be handled.
Sometimes even the experts have no clue, and this is part of the reality that we're facing.
Yeah, well, the expert here depend on what's written in the legal document, and if they are not clear about, we also only can do guesswork.
Totally. I would say it's 3:28, and we're running not late yet, but we're running towards the end of the session, and seeing that probably you all have appointments later on, not the speakers here, but you as viewers. I would think that we say thank you very warmly, and that we appreciate the time you took, and that we all recommend to turn on the lights and to tidy up. And I'm sure that you're already in contact with Gradar, but if you want to stay in contact with everybody on this session, do so on LinkedIn. And Philip, I'm sure that you maybe have even some more words for the crowd that I don't find right now.
No, I don't.
You don't? Well then.
Well, I have some. It's the
You do. Please.
I'm stepping up. Thanks all for coming. It was great having you. As Cliff said, you can contact us on LinkedIn. We can have an informal coffee chat. We love to stay in contact with people that are, or organizations that are affected by this. So we'd love to hear your opinion on this. And we're very much hoping for you to support us for the study. And let's keep in touch and make this place a little bit better than we found it.
That was very engaging. I couldn't have done it better. So it's 3:30. Thanks to all the experts here. Thanks for your time, for your expertise, and see you guys all soon. And let's, as you said, make the world of conversation a bit more transparent in the next days.
Will do.
And years.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. See you.
Gradar.